a lot of startups get themselves in trouble. Like to understand that your product isn't the brand, you have to think about the brand in a larger scale. And by thinking through your brand architecture, you can create that equity and understand like how you want things to be perceived and make things as clear as possible for your clients.
Welcome to another episode of Bourbon and Brand, where we talk about branding, business, and go wherever else the bourbon takes us. I'm Matt. This is Hien.
Yo.
We're your boys from Huck Finch Branding, hosting again this week.
Yeah, and before we get into today's episode, centered around brand architecture, as always, we're going to ask you to subscribe to the show if you haven't already. If you've watched multiple episodes of the show and you haven't subscribed, you're kind of a dick. And as always, make sure to ring the bell. Ring it, ding, ding. Ring it
up
all day.
And just like specifically this week, just share us on TikTok.
Yeah.
Because I don't know. We might be on there.
Is that a thing?
I don't know. I think we have a channel. Anyway, we want to just slide into TikTok with as little grace as possible.
Exactly. So, as I mentioned, today's episode is going to be about brand architecture. Sounds kind of fancy, but it's pretty straightforward, but it's something your brand really needs, especially as you plan to grow and expand on your brand, as most businesses want to do.
Yeah, absolutely. And there's a lot of ways to use it in a, if you are not doing a whole brand refresh or you're just thinking about things in an early phase of your business. It's kind of a nice exercise to double check against your vision and maybe what the 20 years down the road version is. It's kind of like a nice little way to run through a litmus test of how you might imagine your brand growing over that time.
Yeah. So before we get into what brand architecture is, we're going to cheers to brand architecture.
Cheers. It deserves it.
Yeah. So, what is brand architecture? You're probably asking, or you may have Googled it.
I'll ask. What is brand architecture?
Great question, Matt. So, what brand architecture is basically how you set up your organization so that it's very clear, it's not chaotic, and there's a clear distinction between what your brand is and what your products are and service, whatever they may be.
Yeah, and another part of it is how might this be valuable? How does this help? We hear these terms like brand equity. They're all just kind of fancy sounding things. I think we all know generally what brand is enough to be confused about what that definition is. Then you add equity to it. It's how do you build such a thing? Is it how much your business is worth? And how does brand architecture help you with the value?
Yeah, I think something that comes up, especially with startups and early founders, when they have a problem that they want to solve, their brand is very much tied into what their product is. Mm-hmm. And so they're just very much trying to solve that problem with that product. But then later on, as they try to offer more products, it's very difficult. Even want to go to a different market, It's very hard for them to do so because they've already built that perception, that brand equity around this thing. So now they have to go through a costly rebrand, or if they even realize that's something they should do,
right.
Or they struggle to get into a new market, change the perception about things. So that's where a lot of startups get themselves in trouble. To understand that your product isn't the brand, you have to think about the brand in a larger scale. And by thinking through your brand architecture, you can create that equity and understand how you want things to be perceived and make things as clear as possible for your clients.
Yeah, and kind of a quick example of since this is Bourbon and Brand, even thinking about, so we're drinking Fox River still, it's from A2 Distilling Company, if they were the A2 Ann Arbor Bourbon Company and their vision was always to end up making vodka or wine or something at the end of the day, you have kind of a problem there.
Right.
It's great if you're just gonna make bourbon, it's your niche, people are they know bourbon, they know exactly how to do it. But if that's not the full sort of vision, even if you're 3 or 5 years down the road from slotting in the vodka or whatever your next product might be, that's kind of an easy way to illustrate what you're talking about, where you get too tied into whatever your initial product is, but you already know there are other things you want to do. When you're naming or when you're branding the company from the outset, it's an important thing to get right, because you have to undo that, and then you could end up pissing off the bourbon lovers of the world.
Yeah.
Just being are they not going to concentrate on making craft bourbon anymore? I love that place, and now I have to deal with the fact they're maybe not focusing as much on it. So it's something to be really mindful about, even if you're just right at the beginning of it, getting this architecture right to allow you to grow in the way that you have. You don't have to figure out the whole thing, but in the right structure, you know that you can comfortably grow within like the vision of your company.
Yeah, and I think as you talk about Ann Arbor Distilling, there's a local example that you and I like to use where they are a craft bar. They started selling nothing but beer. The name beer was actually in the name of their bar. So the perception there is that they only serve beer. So they are alienating wine lovers or cocktail lovers because they don't think that you offer that. They offer that as a thing, so they lose out on the market. They went through a rebrand, which required them to change their logo, change the sign that they have outdoors to just say the Grotto. But at this point, like now they have to invest more money into showing like, hey, we actually serve wine, we serve cocktails, we don't just serve beer. But that's just more work that they have to do to undo this perception that they only serve beer.
Yeah, and it's a very tactical thing at some point as well, because like you put all the marketing dollars into whatever it is. In this case, it's like, you know, the beer grotto or whatever. Like you're the Bourbon distilling company, and you spend money to get people to know it as that thing, and it's like you kind of have to undo all that. You've sort of boxed yourself in with your own money, time, and effort into something that isn't the fully actualized version and traps you in that way. And you do have to go through a rebrand, which is great for branding companies. It keeps us going, but we actually don't love having to like rebrand. We like to get it right up front.
We'd rather just brand, get it right.
Yeah, because that's ultimately where the value of any good branding company comes from. Is the first swing you get at that, it's something that can stick around for 50, 100 years, and you can grow into, you know, whatever version of your future is comfortably, or at least without your brand actually inhibiting the progress towards it.
Yeah, so we talked a bit about some of the value of brand architecture as really around clarity, understanding who your customers are, your customers' perception of you. There's the idea of value in there as well, where if you have a brand that has a name, has the equity built, if you trust in that brand and they offer sub-brands underneath of products, then you're going to carry that trust forward. So something like Nike, for example. If you're a fan of their products, then you might like Nike ACG or Nike running, whatever that thing might be, because you've already built that loyalty towards the brand.
They're a great example of really using not just the swoosh as this brand, but using architecture to fuel the brand and make it more valuable, more meaningful to more people.
Yeah. So we've talked about the value of brand architecture. Again, it's just a way you organize your brand to make sure people are clear on what it is. So we're going to jump into some common ones that we see, and then give you some tips on how to think through it for yourself to make sure you have a brand architecture that will help you live 50 to 100 years.
Yeah, and like the first one we usually start with is branded house. So there's a strong sort of master brand. It has divisions that feature a master brand name alongside a product or service description. So the easiest one, especially visually, and broadest one is like FedEx. So maybe you can dive into a little bit how FedEx works at the top, and then even from a logo structure, it's very kind of master branded.
Yeah. So, I mean, if everybody thinks of FedEx, everybody knows the brand, but then you start to think about the sub-brands they have. They have FedEx Express, FedEx Overnight, FedEx Freight. So what they're doing there, they want to tie each one of these sub-brands to the value that you get out of FedEx. You're going to get quality customer service, quality delivery, they're always on time, their boxes aren't destroyed when you get them. You're really tying that brand equity to the value that you get there. So that's why you may potentially want to go with this. If you have a strong enough brand already existing, then you can tie that to your different brands. It's very valuable in the sense that it makes marketing very simple. You can just market FedEx, your top brand at the top, and then as people are aware of it, they come in, they're like, oh, I want to use FedEx Overnight versus FedEx Express.
Yeah, and the opposite of that, like the downside is you kind of have, you know, FedEx is that master brand, and yeah, it says, you know, ground or freight or whatever there below it. The colors might be a little bit different, but if FedEx were to have, you know, a lawsuit or mistreated their employees or their customers or whatever it might be, the whole ship is kind of there, at least from public perception. Like, I'm not a FedEx Freight customer, for example, but if I did need to use it and I'd moved away from them as just like a normal like FedEx customer for my small business or whatever, it's like I'm probably gonna think twice about that as well as freight if I ever needed it.
Or any FedEx product, and now they're stuck trying to trying to change the perception now, as we
Yep.
talked about. So that's a branded house. The next common one is a house of brands. And whereas a house of brands, usually you have a master brand that's well known, and the products and brands underneath, they're not tied back the way that the FedEx branded house is, but they all have their own individual brands and they're known for their own thing. A great example of that is Unilever. Most people have probably heard of them, but if I ask you what Unilever owns or what they do, you might struggle because they don't really talk about that very clearly, but it surprises a lot of people to realize they own Ben and Jerry's,
Right.
they own Axe body spray, they own Dove, just to name a few. Hellman's mayo, which is my favorite.
I mean, if you own Ben and Jerry's, like mayo is the next thing you want to get into.
Exactly, and the value of this is it allows you to kind of like pick up brands and have them have their own distinct personalities. They're all very different. Right? Ben and Jerry's is a different brand personality-wise than a Dove, so they can have their own distinct brand, be branded differently, live on their own. Obviously, the challenge there is it's a lot more to maintain all this, and you're gonna have to market them differently. It's more to spend on. So that's the one downside of the house of brands.
And bringing all of these different personality types under that is also going to be a challenge. The Super Bowl commercial that just came out, I think it's Procter and Gamble.
Procter & Gamble.
It's kind of the first time I've really ever seen a brand like Unilever or Procter and Gamble that has this huge catalog and this kind of a brand architecture, like kind of showing off all the different brands in one commercial.
Yeah.
And it was funny. It was like really, really awesome. I think Rob Riggle was in there.
Yeah. Bounty Man.
Being the bounty man, like all these things. But it's like, even as a consumer, even understand this, like it was a little confusing.
You're right.
Like, what the point of that commercial was, but it's Super Bowl. It was funny. Rob Riggle's awesome.
Riggle's
Any
awesome.
Rob Riggle vehicle, I'm here for it.
Yeah. And he wore a muscle suit.
But it's a great example. Like YouTube it if you kind of want to understand this. Like it could be a little confusing even when all presented at once. You're like, how does Procter and Gamble tie all these together? It's like it's a little bit different from a consumer, but they all have these different personalities. Like you don't need to buy everything Procter and Gamble for them to be successful, for their brand to work. You need to identify with some or one of their many products.
Yeah.
So just how the business functions is entirely affected by that as well.
Yeah, that makes me think of another pro and con for the house of brands. The pro is you can go into different markets very more easy, I guess, like it's a way to put it. Like nothing's ever easy, but you can see an audience needs to be served, and you can serve them with a brand underneath yours. And you don't have to explain them anything. They separate website, separate brand. The downside, as a master brand, you have to really think about like what you're going to add product wise.
Right.
So you have to be really strong about your vision, your purpose, and your mission. Because you can find yourself just adding in new products just because there's a need for a market when it really doesn't fit in well. So that could be another challenge for this one.
Yeah, and like this doesn't make any sense, but like if FedEx bought Hellman's mayonnaise, like it's weird because it's not in their like general line or a business or industry. But even so, it's like, do you change the name then to FedEx mayonnaise? Like you would, because that's your structure. Whereas like in the house of brands, you might just bring them in, like they still get to kind of maintain who they are, but they fit whatever Unilever's catalog is, which is very hard to understand at a glance one way or the other.
It's
consumer
insane.
Products, basically.
Yeah, it's worth going to their website and just seeing all their brands. Like just even if you filter down to the U.S. brands available in the U.S. alone, like it is out there. And then when you look at the global one or ones in Europe only, it's crazy.
Yeah, it is crazy.
Yeah. So then the last one that's pretty common, it's called we'll call it the hybrid architecture, and it's kind of the trail mix, the mishmash of all of the above. A great example of this is Amazon. So you have Amazon as the main brand, and certain things still have Amazon the name, like Alexa that has Amazon there, but other things don't, like Audible or Twitch. Another brand that's like this is Google, where they have that master brand as Google Home, but there's Nest as well. While this is common, you most likely aren't going to use it because you see more often in mergers and acquisitions where it's just a thing of convenience,
right.
Where you're just trying to leverage the equity and the brand like perception that this thing that you bought, you bring it in, and then maybe ultimately you rebrand it later on the way like Google did with Nest, where they're like, okay, we're moving everything over to Google Home,
right?
Which is obviously a challenge because you're paying more money for that. You could be upsetting people because they want to just keep staying in nests versus just in Google Home.
Yep.
And you could really be disrupting your culture because with Google, like they have Google Home staff and Nest staff.
Yep.
When you combine the two, there may be overlap and they probably let people go.
Actually, like recently they did bring in combine Google Net, but it was like ongoing for a long time how they were going to handle it. And it was starting to create confusion because like they acquired Nest quite a while ago now, and everyone was sort of waiting for it to become part of like Google Home or whatever, and it just became confusing. Like when you bought it, you're like, is this Google? Like it was just a little bit confusing, especially if you're like a tech forward person.
Yeah,
you're kind of aware of these two brands and that one owns the other, but it's like, is that a hybrid structure or is it just like no one decided what to do?
Yeah.
You know, so like that's one of the things, like hybrid, like you said, sometimes in mergers and acquisitions it just sort of like ends up this way, but you always have the like crazy Amazon example where it's like nobody else really has a business that fit, like they're inventing brands every day. Like they have like a mouthwash brand.
Yeah.
They're just making it, so it's like they are truly hybrid in every way. And like I always think of Twitch as the one that of their like main sort of like cornerstone brands, it doesn't have like the prime or the A to Z like smile face or arrow under it, just because like Twitch is a really different community than this broad A to Z thing. And it's almost like Twitch isn't an A to Z for everyone, like the core of its culture and where it comes from. So, you know, I'm sure that's part of the conversation you could guess that they're having, where it's like, as soon as I put that A to Z kind of idea behind it that a lot of the Prime products have and Amazon proper has, it's a little weird for the foundation of what Twitch was. So it'll be interesting to see if they like change it over time after a few years, or they really kind of hold true to the original like Twitch brand and let it kind of exist almost like Hellman's mayonnaise. Really remodeled. It's an interesting case.
Yeah, it's definitely a challenge for the marketing side of things because some of these other brands, like some of the sub brands that follow more that like branded house like model, like Amazon Alexa, Amazon Prime, like you're relying on the Amazon brand to like bring you forward. But something like Twitch, Kindle, even if you didn't realize it's an Amazon product, Fire, those could be things where you have to actively market on their own to make sure that they have the brand awareness, get the customers. So, but the nice side is that you can start with like the branded house model of like, I think like with Kindle, for example, it was Amazon Kindle when first released, and then now that it's built up a brand, they dropped the Amazon part entirely, and it's just Kindle. Like independently, Kindle is a brand. We know what Kindle is.
Yeah, and like even thinking back to the roots of Amazon, like as we get to kind of the last sip here, this might be a good lead in, is like even from the beginning it was like basically an online bookstore. It was still like the idea of this, like they knew Amazon A to Z, like we are gonna try to be a company that essentially sells, if it exists we sell it. They just knew that books was kind of their best entry point for this type of a thing. So that kind of maybe gets us to the last sip about, if you're earlier in this process and you're not Jeff Bezos, who I'm sure is listening, maybe some tips that could, your kind of thoughts on, some actionable things, or at least some things you can be thinking about to not make a mistake here, I think is the biggest thing, is just to like, not close down or be restricted to where your brand can go.
Yeah, I think the first thing, this goes back to what we said at the beginning, is the fact that your product is not your brand. Like, if you're starting off right now, like, just remember that. Like, make sure that there's a distinct brand for your product and for your brand overall. That could mean accepting that the name that you have right now is for the product. You need to come with a brand on top of that to house it. So that's key, especially if you're starting off. So think about where you want your brand to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now. If you're only selling this one product, that's probably a bad idea because times change. Things move so fast. You're going to get disrupted. If you're not constantly disrupting, you're going to get disrupted. So you can't rely on just this product. What we would recommend is take these 3 ideas for brand architecture. We have them linked below, so you can see some graphics, so you can think them through. Try to build out a brand architecture for your brand with each one of these. See if you can build them out, and then see which one feels the most right. and then like try to move forward with that to implement, which is going to be the hardest part.
Yeah, and so much of this is just about intention and like so much value in writing it down, like sketch it out, like see what it looks like. Does it make sense? I think for me, that's one of the most valuable pieces of it is just sort of writing it down and just, you know, you'll realize really quickly whether you're like you're a FedEx model or Unilever model just by thinking about that 5, 10, or 20 years. And also this can be tough depending on where you are in your phase of business. Like if you're at the beginning, it's great. You really just have to maybe think about who you think your consumer is going to be, you know, like how are they going to interact? What type of thing do you want to have exist in that 5, 10, or 20 years? If you have a successful business and, you know, you might be at this different point where like you have to undo something and go forward, it is a difficult process to kind of sort through and could affect culture and not only the culture of who comes in, like if you're a wine drinker, you're coming in the beer grotto or whatever it might be now, but also your staff are, maybe they're no longer like craft beer people, they have to know a little bit more about wine. So it has a lot of different effects depending on when you do it, so the earlier the better.
Yeah, so with last words here with the last sip is, if you haven't thought through your brand architecture, you definitely need to. Check out the graphics below. If you are in a position where you feel like, because you haven't thought through your brand architecture, that you're struggling to explain to different markets what you offer, why you're valuable, you're being confused for a particular product only, it may be time to consider a rebrand. And if that's true, then you should check out our rebrand guide. It basically tells you everything you need to know. Gives you like different reasons why, legitimate reasons why you should rebrand. What you should expect budget and timeline wise, what to ask your branding partners if you're going to go out and find an agency, what to ask, what to look for. Check out that guide. It's below, but the link is huckfinch.com/rebrand/
No slash.
Dash.
Guide.
Good. Sorry, my bad. So huckfinch.com/rebrand-guide. And again, the link's below. Just click the link. Yeah, don't listen to me.
Yeah. That's why it's the last sip. Choose
Exactly.
another episode. We'll see you again next week.
Yeah. Later, people.
Thanks for watching another episode of Bourbon and Brand. Be sure to leave your questions in comments below so we can get to them in a future episode.
And make sure to subscribe to the show by clicking subscribe below, and turn on the bell to get notified of all future episodes of the greatest freaking show about bourbon and branding. Cheers.